Good evening and welcome to Turner Classic Movies. I'm Dave Karger. Tonight we're paying tribute to a Grammy-winning singer-songwriter who also had a successful career in movies, Kris Kristofferson. Born in Brownsville, Texas in 1936, Kristofferson died a few months ago on September 28th at the age of 88. He was a man who truly could have pursued any path in life, and he tried many early on. After distinguishing himself as a star boxer and rugby player in high school, he was awarded a Rhodes Scholarship, and he studied English literature at Oxford. He went on to serve in the U.S. Army and was even offered the chance to teach English at West Point. But instead, he turned it down and left the Army to try his hand at songwriting in Nashville. He released his debut album in 1970, and the same year, one of his songs, Sunday Morning Comin' Down, became a huge hit for his friend and mentor, Johnny Cash. A year later, in 1971, Janis Joplin scored a #1 hit with her rendition of Kristofferson's Me and Bobby McGee. 1971 also marked Kris Kristofferson's debut in movies, and up first tonight is a film he made 3 years later for director Martin Scorsese. From 1974, he stars opposite Ellen Burstyn in Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore. Burstyn plays the title role, Alice Hyatt, a woman who's forced to figure out a new life for herself and her young son when her husband dies suddenly in a car accident. She heads west to pursue a lifelong dream, and along the way, she takes on a series of jobs and navigates relationships with different men, including Kris Kristofferson. The cast also features 12-year-old Alfred Lutter, along with Harvey Keitel and Diane Ladd, who earned an Oscar nomination for her supporting role as Alice's friend Flo. Keep an eye out for Ladd's 7-year-old daughter, Laura Dern, who appears briefly as a little girl with an ice cream cone. And you'll also get to see a young Jodie Foster in a supporting role. From 1974, with an Oscar-winning performance from Ellen Burstyn, Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore. Ellen Burstyn had just finished making The Exorcist when she got the script for Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore. She was excited about the project from the beginning, and she was afforded more creative control than she'd ever had before. She chose Martin Scorsese to direct the film after he was pointed out to her by her friend Francis Ford Coppola. Scorsese was still a newcomer, but his 1973 film Mean Streets impressed Burstyn, and she wanted him to bring a similar realistic, gritty quality to this romantic drama. She also brought along many of her friends from the Actors Studio, and together with Scorsese, they developed a rehearsal process that allowed for improvisation. During one of those sessions, Kris Kristofferson, who was not a trained actor, came up with the line, "Come on, I'll take you to Monterey." With that improvised line, they figured out how the movie should end. Up next, Kristofferson returns opposite Barbra Streisand in a musical drama from 1976.
Next on TCM, A Star is Born. Then Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid. And later, Bloom in Love. We keep Kris Kristofferson in our hearts tonight.
Welcome back to TCM. I'm Dave Karger. Tonight we're putting the spotlight on movies starring the multi-talented Kris Kristofferson, who passed away in September at 88 years old. Kristofferson had a long and prolific career both in Hollywood and as a singer-songwriter, but he reached the peak of his success in the 1970s. During that decade, he released his debut album, wrote songs that became hits for the likes of Johnny Cash and Janis Joplin, and made a string of successful movies, including the one that's up next. From 1976, he stars opposite Barbra Streisand in A Star is Born. This is the third adaptation of the classic story that first made it to the screen in 1937, starring Janet Gaynor and Frederick March, and then again as a 1954 musical starring Judy Garland and James Mason. But unlike those earlier versions, this one transports the story from Hollywood into the world of rock and roll. Kris Kristofferson plays a rock star who discovers a promising new talent in Barbra Streisand. They fall in love, but as her career takes off, his declines, which takes a toll on their relationship. This adaptation was conceived and written by Joan Didion and her husband, John Gregory Dunn, and they planned it as a drama set in the rock and roll industry. As part of their research, they spent 3 weeks touring with rock groups like Led Zeppelin and Jethro Tull, and they planned the film as a vehicle for James Taylor and Carly Simon, who were married at the time. Taylor and Simon turned down the offer, so other artists were considered, including Diana Ross and Mick Jagger. In the end, Barbra Streisand came on board to star, and she oversaw every aspect of the production, including choosing Kris Kristofferson as her leading man. From 1976, featuring the Oscar-winning love theme evergreen, this is A Star is Born. In her recent memoir, Barbra Streisand wrote about the experience of casting A Star is Born. At the time, she was dating the film's producer, John Peters, and she was very involved in overseeing every detail of the production. At one point, they offered the leading man role to Elvis Presley, but they were rebuffed by his manager, Colonel Tom Parker. Streisand wrote, "I had no regrets about Elvis. Kris was it. Cast the right person, and you're already halfway there." Kristofferson's performance earned him a Golden Globe for Best Actor in a Musical or Comedy. The movie also earned 4 Oscar nominations for Best Cinematography, Sound, Original Score, and Original Song. It won the award for Best Original Song for the love theme Evergreen, written by Streisand with lyrics by Paul Williams. In 2019, during Streisand's concert in London's Hyde Park, Kris Kristofferson appeared as a special guest. He joined her on stage to sing their duet from the film, Lost Inside of You, and she recalled he was as charming as ever, and the audience showered him with applause. It was a joy seeing him receive the recognition and love he so richly deserved. Up next, Kris Kristofferson and James Coburn star in a 1973 Western directed by Sam Peckinpah.
Next on TCM, Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid. Then Bloom in Love. And later, Roll Over. Join the rabble-rousers on TCM tonight.
Hello, I'm Dave Karger. Thanks for sticking with me tonight on TCM as we continue our tribute to the late Kris Kristofferson. Over the course of 5 decades, beginning in the early 1970s, Kristofferson acted in more than 50 movies. And up next is another film that came early on in his career. From director Sam Peckinpah in 1973, it's Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid. Kristofferson plays the famous outlaw Billy the Kid, with James Coburn co-starring as his old friend, the lawman Pat Garrett, who's given the difficult task of bringing the kid to justice. 4 years before this movie hit theaters, Sam Peckinpah redefined the Western genre with The Wild Bunch. Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid was another of Peckinpah's attempts to reimagine and subvert the myths of the Old West. The cast here includes many actors who had been fixtures in the genre: Jason Robards, Jack Elam, Barry Sullivan, Chill Wills, Slim Pickens, and Cotty Gerardo, to name just a few. Kris Kristofferson had only made 2 other movies before this, but Peckinpah decided to cast him as Billy the Kid after seeing him perform on stage at the Troubadour in Los Angeles. And Kristofferson wasn't the only singer-songwriter who got a substantial role in this film. Bob Dylan made his dramatic debut here, playing a member of Billy the Kid's gang named Alias. He also contributed to the film's soundtrack, making this his first soundtrack album, which includes the song Knockin' on Heaven's Door. Dylan's score was nominated for a Grammy and a BAFTA award, and Kris Kristofferson earned a BAFTA nomination as Most Promising Newcomer. As you're watching, also keep an eye out for Kristofferson's frequent collaborator and soon-to-be wife, Rita Coolidge, who plays a character named Maria. From 1973, here is Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid. Production on Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid was plagued with problems, including director Sam Peckinpah's constant battles with MGM studio executives. By this point in his career, Peckinpah was essentially an outlaw in Hollywood, and his alcoholism was out of control. He drank on set all day long, and as James Coburn later said, after about 4 hours, Sam was gone. He was a genius for about 4 hours, and then it was all downhill. Still, in spite of this, Kris Kristofferson liked working with Peckinpah, and the two became good friends. They went on to make 2 more movies together, Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia, which was released a year later in 1974, and Convoy from 1978. In one interview, Kristofferson explained his affection for Peckinpah. "We had the same values. Sam believed in the dignity of the human spirit, and I think that attracted me to him. He believed in the importance of courage and being true to your soul." Up next is another movie that Kris Kristofferson made in 1973, a romantic comedy co-starring George Segal and Susan Ansbach.
Next on TCM, Bloom in Love. Then Roll Over. And later, Riff Raff. Join the rabble-rousers on TCM tonight.